Energy media readers, the federal government announced another support program for oil and gas this week. It actually was for large companies, but oil and gas, of course, is part of that. And the question then comes up, are there strings attached around the Trudeau government's climate policies? And the Prime Minister made it very clear that, in fact, the companies, if they want money, will have to submit some kind of plan to be net zero by 2050, net zero emissions. So today we're going to be talking to Valentina Kretzschmar from Wood Mackenzie about what other major oil and gas companies are doing. So welcome to the interview, Valentina.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me.
Now, this is, I'm fascinated by what the European majors are doing because, of course, they're a bit ahead of the Canadian ones and the North American ones as well. And Wood Mackenzie believes that in the post-COVID era, it's likely that the majors, such as we're talking about Shell and Total and so on, are going to accelerate their pivot to the energy transition after the COVID pandemic. Could you give me an explanation of why Wood Mackenzie thinks that might happen?
Yes, I will. Well, maybe just start by saying that the European majors have really led the energy transition efforts in the oil and gas sector. And it's really in the post-Paris Agreement, so from December 2015, that we have seen some significant moves being made by this group, starting with Total and Shell, for example. And over the last few years, these companies have really started to invest in, started to diversify and started to invest in a number of different clean technologies. And at the same time, they started to make carbon commitments, which were modest to begin with, but these commitments have grown year on year. So now we have the situation that just even during this crisis, this group of companies that has led the transition efforts has come out and reconfirmed their commitment towards carbon reduction and reconfirmed their path towards net zero, a net zero strategy out 2050. And we just had sort of Shell and Total recently setting much tougher carbon targets from scope 3 emissions out 2050. So your question in terms of whether what's going to happen in the post-COVID world is a very interesting one. And so why is it that these companies are actually reacting? Well, as I just said, they have been doing quite a lot around it even before the crisis started. So what this crisis has shown was that really the resolve of the EU government as well as the UK government has become even stronger, in their intention to rebuild their economies on green principles. So it's really these companies are just reacting to increasing pressures from governments, increasing pressures from financial regulators, both in the EU and UK, and of course increasing pressures from consumers. And this is why they have come out with these reconfirmed strategies on new energies.
Now, what might that look like in practical terms? Are we talking about them getting into solar and wind farms? I know some of them are already. Perhaps they'll accelerate that. And what about other infrastructures like electric vehicle charging infrastructure? Is that the kind of investments that they might make?
Yes, absolutely. So over the last 5 years, the European majors have invested around $10 billion in clean technologies. About 80% was in M&A. So they have largely grown through M&A or venture capital vehicles. And 20% was through organic developments. So they have already invested in a number of different clean technologies, in solar, offshore, onshore wind, electric charging, and really it didn't look like a very coherent strategy for any of them. But increasingly now we see, especially sort of led by Shell and Total, they're really investing in the power sector, because they believe that electricity is the future, and therefore they're investing in these companies. So the rest of the European majors, they have invested in solar, offshore, onshore wind, really leveraging their experience and on the upstream side. A very good example is Equinor, for example. They have very much differentiated themselves as a very strong offshore wind player. They have invested organically, largely organically, into their proprietary floating offshore wind technology, and they're now kind of one of the strongest players in this space.
How much of this is driven, Valentina, by concern from the majors that post-COVID-19 we're not going back to 100 million barrels a day of oil production, say, or I forget the global production numbers for natural gas, but what if, let's take the oil market as an example. We saw in 2015, taking just 1.5 million or 2 million barrels a day out of the market, caused prices to crash, and we had a 2-year downturn. If you took, say, if 5 of the 30 million barrels a day that the pandemic caused, the demand destruction, or then if we lost 5 million barrels a day, that would be a significant change to the market. Are they worried that might be the case?
For sure, they're worried, and I think we've had 2 CEOs now, both Shell and BP CEOs, that have come out and said, "This is it. We may have seen peak demand happen or being accelerated with this crisis." For sure, this is one of the key worries. But at the same time, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what shape this recovery is going to take. While some of the changes may stick, more of us could work from home or travel less for business. There is also indication that, especially in the areas where restrictions are being lifted slowly, that people are desperately wanting to go back to the old way of life. Now, the old way of life is not sustainable. So we all know that. And there is obviously in geographic regions such as European Union and the UK, there's very strong recognition in the kind of regulator level that we cannot go back to the old normal. And therefore, there will have to be some regulations imposed that will put us on this pathway towards net zero carbon, which governments have committed to. And what that means is possible erosion of returns from the oil and gas projects with carbon taxes or higher cost of capital that we'll have to pay.
Assuming that demand does recover, and some of the majors are looking, or I guess all of them are looking at carbon mitigation strategies, what kind of strategies might they implement?
Well, carbon mitigation strategies, you can either invest in renewable clean energies that will help you offset whatever you produce, or the carbon that you produce, or you can invest in carbon sinks, such as carbon capture and storage, or reforestation, for example, which is one of the most effective carbon sinks. So the majors are doing, or are actually very active in both of these areas. They're investing in carbon capture and storage, and they also have quite strong reforestation programs. And certainly they're looking into new strategies, kind of really building pathways towards building new businesses and business models around clean technologies, and really getting into this power sector, investing across the electricity value chain.
Valentina, thank you very much for this. It seems like this is a precursor to where Canadian companies might go in 5 or 10 years. Europe seems to be leading this decarbonization and trend and the shift to a low carbon future. So we appreciate your insights into what's going on in Europe.
Thank you.